Fact 1. Poker is a family of card games that combines elements of strategy, probability, and psychology. While there are many variations of the game, they all share a common foundation. Players are dealt cards. They make bets based on the strength of their hand, and the player with the best hand at the end, or the last player remaining after all others have folded, wins the pot. Fact 2. The standard deck used in poker contains 52 cards divided into 4 suits: spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs. Each suit contains 13 cards ranked from lowest to highest: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king, and ace. The ace is unique in that it can be used as either the highest card in the deck or the lowest, depending on the situation. Fact 3. The pot is the collection of chips or money that players are competing for in any given hand. Every bet, call, and raise made during the hand goes into the pot. At the end of the hand, the pot is awarded to the winner. In some situations, the pot may be split between 2 players if they have equally ranked hands, which is called a split pot or a chop. Fact 4. Poker chips are the standard unit of currency used in poker games. They come in various denominations, usually represented by different colors. White chips are typically the lowest denomination, followed by red, green, and black. In casino and tournament settings, higher denominations like purple and yellow may also be used. Using chips rather than cash makes it easier to track bets and keep the game moving at a steady pace. Fact 5. The dealer button, often simply called the button, is a small disc that rotates around the table clockwise after each hand. The player sitting at the button is considered the dealer for that hand, even in casino settings where a professional dealer handles the cards. The button position is the most advantageous position at the table because that player acts last in every round of betting after the first one, giving them more information before they have to make a decision. Fact 6. The 2 players sitting immediately to the left of the dealer button are required to post forced bets before any cards are dealt. These are called the small blind and the big blind. The small blind is typically half the size of the big blind. These forced bets exist to create initial action and give players something to compete for from the very beginning of each hand. Without blinds, players could simply fold every hand and wait indefinitely for a perfect hand before risking any money. Fact 7. Texas Hold'em is by far the most popular form of poker played today. It is the game featured in the World Series of Poker main event, the game most commonly televised, and the game most beginners learn first. Understanding Texas Hold'em provides a strong foundation for learning other variations of the game, as many of the core principles, hand rankings, betting structures, reading opponents, apply across all forms of poker. Fact 8. In Texas Hold'em, each player is dealt 2 private cards face down. These are called hole cards or pocket cards. They belong only to that player and are not visible to anyone else at the table. A player's hole cards, combined with the community cards that will be dealt later, form the basis of their final hand. The skill of poker lies partly in using those 2 private cards as effectively as possible. Fact 9. After the hole cards are dealt, the first round of betting begins. This round is called the pre-flop. The player to the left of the big blind acts first, and play moves clockwise around the table. Each player can fold, call the amount of the big blind, or raise. The small blind and big blind act last in this round. The big blind has the option to raise even if no one else has raised before them, a privilege sometimes called the option. Fact 10. Folding means surrendering your hand and any chips you have already put into the pot. When you fold, you are out of the hand and cannot win the pot. Folding is not a failure. It is one of the most important skills in poker. Knowing when to fold and save your remaining chips for a better situation is a discipline that separates experienced players from beginners, who often call too many bets out of curiosity or emotional attachment to their hand. Fact 11. Calling means matching the current bet in order to stay in the hand. When you call, you are indicating that you want to continue playing, but you do not want to increase the size of the bet. Calling is a passive action. While it is sometimes the correct play, experienced players note that calling too frequently, without the selectivity to fold bad hands or the aggression to raise good ones, is a common leak in beginner strategy. Fact 12. Raising means increasing the size of the current bet. When you raise, all other players who want to continue in the hand must now match your larger bet. Raising accomplishes several things at once. It increases the size of the pot, it puts pressure on other players, it can narrow the field by encouraging weaker hands to fold, and it provides information about your own hand's strength, whether that information is true or deceptive. Fact 13. After the pre-flop betting round is complete, 3 community cards are dealt face-up in the middle of the table. This is called the flop. Community cards are shared by all players still in the hand. Every player uses the community cards in combination with their own whole cards to make the best possible 5-card hand. The flop is a pivotal moment in any hand because it dramatically changes the landscape of possibilities for every player. Fact 14. After the flop betting round is complete, a 4th community card is dealt face-up. This card is called the turn, sometimes referred to as 4th street. The turn can dramatically change the strength of any player's hand. A player who was leading after the flop may suddenly find their hand vulnerable, while a player who was behind may have picked up a strong draw or completed their hand entirely. Fact 15. After the turn betting round is complete, the 5th and final community card is dealt face-up. This card is called the river, sometimes referred to as 5th street. The river is the last card, and after it is dealt, there is one final round of betting. If more than one player remains after this betting round, a showdown occurs, where all remaining players reveal their hands and the best hand wins the pot. Fact 16. The showdown is the moment at the end of a hand when players who have not folded reveal their cards. In a showdown, the player who made the last aggressive action, the last bet or raise, is generally required to show their cards first. Other players may then either show their cards to win the pot or muck their cards if their hand is beaten. You are never required to show a losing hand, and many experienced players prefer to keep their losing hands hidden to avoid giving away information about how they play. Fact 17. The highest possible hand in standard poker is the royal flush. A royal flush consists of the ace, king, queen, jack, and 10 of the same suit. It is the rarest hand in poker and cannot be beaten by any other hand. In a lifetime of casual poker playing, most players will never see a royal flush at the table. The mathematical probability of being dealt a royal flush in 5 cards is approximately 1 in 649,740. Fact 18. The second highest hand is the straight flush. A straight flush is any 5 consecutive cards of the same suit. For example, the 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 of hearts. The rank of a straight flush is determined by its highest card. A straight flush only loses to a higher straight flush, or the royal flush, which is technically the highest possible straight flush. Fact 19. 4 of a kind, also called quads, is the third highest hand. It consists of all 4 cards of the same rank, for example, all 4 queens. If 2 players both have 4 of a kind, the player with the higher ranked 4 of a kind wins. In community card games like Texas Hold'em, it is mathematically possible for 2 players to share the same 4 of a kind from the community cards, in which case the player with the higher 5th card, called the kicker, determines the winner. Fact 20. A full house is the 4th highest hand. It consists of 3 cards of one rank and 2 cards of another rank. For example, 3 10s and 2 5s. This combination is sometimes described by its components, such as 10s full of 5s. When comparing 2 full houses, the player with the higher 3 of a kind portion wins. A full house beats a flush, a straight, 2 pair, 1 pair, and a high card hand. Fact 21. A flush is 5 cards of the same suit that are not in consecutive order. For example, the 2, 5, 7, jack, and ace of spades is an ace-high flush. When 2 players both have a flush, the player with the highest card in their flush wins. If the highest cards are the same, the comparison moves to the second highest card, then the third, and so on until a difference is found. If all 5 cards are identical in rank, the 2 flushes tie and the pot is split. Fact 22. A straight is 5 consecutive cards of mixed suits. For example, the 5 of clubs, 6 of diamonds, 7 of spades, 8 of hearts, and 9 of clubs form a 9-high straight. Aces can be used at the top of a straight, ace, king, queen, jack, 10, or at the bottom, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is called a wheel or a bicycle. An ace cannot be used in the middle of a straight, so a sequence like queen, king, ace, 2, 3 does not constitute a valid straight. Fact 23. Three of a kind consists of 3 cards of the same rank and 2 unrelated cards. For example, 3 jacks with a 7 and a 2 is called 3 jacks, or trip jacks. When 2 players both have 3 of a kind, the player with the higher rank trips wins. 3 of a kind beats 2 pair and 1 pair but loses to a straight, flush, full house, 4 of a kind, straight flush, and royal flush. Fact 24. 2 pair is a hand containing 2 different pairs. For example, 2 kings and 2 fours, with an unrelated 5th card. When comparing 2 pair hands, the player with the higher top pair wins. If both players have the same top pair, the second pair is compared. If both pairs are identical, the 5th card, the kicker, determines the winner. 2 pair is a hand that looks impressive to beginners, but can be quite vulnerable in Texas Hold'em, particularly on boards with many community cards. Fact 25. 1 pair is a hand containing 2 cards of the same rank and 3 unrelated cards. For example, a pair of 7s with an ace, jack, and 3 is a pair of 7s with ace kicker. Pair hands are compared first by the rank of the pair, then by the kickers in descending order. A pair of aces is the highest 1 pair hand and is commonly known as pocket rockets when held as whole cards. Fact 26. The lowest possible hand ranking is simply a high card, 5 unrelated cards that do not form any other combination. In this case, the hand is described by its highest card, such as ace high or king high. High card hands rarely win at Showdown in Texas Hold'em because the community cards make it easy for most players to connect and form at least a pair. However, high card hands can still win in games with fewer community cards or in situations where everyone folds before the showdown. Fact 27. Position at the poker table refers to where you sit relative to the dealer button and, more specifically, when you must act during each round of betting. Players who act earlier in the betting round are said to be in early position, and those who act later are in late position. Late position, particularly the dealer button itself, is extremely advantageous because you get to see what all other players do before you make your decision. Early position players must act with limited information, which requires a more cautious and selective approach. Fact 28. The concept of pot odds is fundamental to making mathematically sound decisions in poker. Pot odds express the ratio of the current size of the pot to the cost of a call you are considering. For example, if the pot contains $100 and your opponent bets $50, making the total pot $150, you must call $50 to continue. Your pot odds are 150 to 50, or 3 to 1. If your probability of winning the hand is greater than 1 in 4, which is 25%, calling is mathematically justified. If your probability is lower, folding is the correct decision. Fact 29. Outs are the cards remaining in the deck that will complete or improve your hand. For example, if you hold 2 hearts and 2 more hearts appear on the flop, you have a flush draw. There are 13 hearts in the deck, and 4 are already accounted for, 2 in your hand and 2 on the board, leaving 9 hearts remaining in the unseen cards. Those 9 cards are your outs. A commonly used rule of thumb is the rule of 4 and 2, which states that you can estimate your percentage chance of completing a draw by multiplying your number of outs by 4 on the flop or by 2 on the turn. Fact 30. Expected value, often abbreviated as EV, is a mathematical concept that describes the average outcome of a decision if it were repeated many times. In poker, a decision is considered positive EV if it will make money over the long run and negative EV if it will lose money over the long run. Making consistently positive EV decisions is the foundation of winning poker strategy. The challenge is that any single decision can result in a loss even when it is the correct one. Poker involves short-term variance that can temporarily mask whether your decisions are actually sound. Fact 31. Bluffing is the act of betting or raising with a weak hand in order to make your opponents believe you have a stronger hand and fold theirs. A well-executed bluff can win a pot that you would have no chance of winning at Showdown. Bluffing is one of the most exciting and misunderstood elements of poker. Beginners often bluff too frequently and in situations where it is unlikely to work, while strong players bluff selectively, choosing spots where the story their bets tell is believable and where their opponent is capable of folding. Fact 32. A semi-bluff is a bet or raise made with a hand that is currently not the best hand, but has the potential to improve to the best hand. For example, betting with a flush draw is a semi-bluff. Your hand may not be winning right now, but if the right card comes, it could become very strong. Semi-bluffs are generally considered more powerful than pure bluffs because they can win in two ways. Either your opponent folds immediately, or you hit your draw and win at showdown. Fact 33. The concept of hand ranges is one of the most important frameworks in modern poker thinking. Rather than trying to put an opponent on one specific hand, experienced players think in terms of the entire range of hands an opponent might have given their actions. When an opponent raises before the flop from early position, their range of possible hands is narrow and generally strong. When they raise from the dealer button, their range is much wider. Reading and responding to ranges rather than single hands leads to better decisions across all situations. Fact 34. Continuation betting, or C-betting, refers to the practice of making a bet on the flop after you were the last player to raise before the flop. Because the pre-flop raiser has shown strength, opponents will often give them credit for having connected with the flop and fold, even when the pre-flop raiser actually missed. The continuation bet is one of the most common and effective plays in Texas Hold'em. However, like all tactics, it can be overused, and observant opponents will begin to call or raise more liberally if they notice a player c-betting too frequently. Fact 35. Check raising is a powerful deceptive move in which a player first checks their action, appearing passive and uninterested, and then raises when an opponent bets behind them. A check raise can be used for value, to build a bigger pot with a strong hand, or as a bluff, to apply pressure and take down the pot. It signals considerable strength to opponents and often forces them to make a difficult decision. In some home game settings, check raising is considered unsporting, but in casino and serious play, it is a completely standard and respected tactical weapon. Fact 36. The term slow playing refers to the strategy of playing a very strong hand passively, by checking and calling rather than betting and raising, in order to disguise its strength and encourage opponents to bet into you or build the pot on your behalf. Slow playing can be effective in the right situations, particularly when you have a hand so strong that it is unlikely to be beaten, and when there is reason to believe your opponent will bet if you show weakness. However, slow playing carries risk. If a dangerous card appears, it can improve an opponent's hand or give them a free draw to beat you. Fact 37. Pot limit and no limit are two different betting structures commonly used in poker. In a no-limit game, players can bet any amount up to all of their chips at any time. This makes no-limit games particularly dramatic and strategically complex because the threat of a very large bet or an all-in is always present. In a pot limit game, the maximum bet at any time is the current size of the pot. This puts a ceiling on how much can be bet, but still allows for significant aggression as the pot grows. Fact 38. Going all in means betting all of your remaining chips. When you go all in, you cannot be forced out of the hand even if an opponent bets more chips than you have. You are simply eligible to win the portion of the pot you contributed to, which is called the main pot. If there are other players with more chips still in the hand, a side pot is created for the additional bets among those players. Understanding main pots and side pots is essential for playing in multiplayer all-in situations correctly. Fact 39. Stack size is the number of chips a player has in front of them, and it profoundly influences how the game is played. A player with a large stack relative to the blinds has many options and can afford to be patient and selective. A player with a short stack, a small number of chips relative to the blinds, must act more urgently, as the blinds will eat through their stack quickly. Short stack strategy and big stack strategy are genuinely different games requiring different approaches, and good players adjust their style based on their current stack depth. Fact 40. The term effective stack refers to the smaller of two players' stacks when considering a hand between them. Because you can only win chips from an opponent up to the amount they have in front of them, the effective stack determines the real depth of play between any two specific players. For example, if you have 500 chips and your opponent has 200 chips, the effective stack between you is 200 chips. Your extra 300 chips can only be contested against players who also have at least 300 chips. Fact 41. Omaha is a popular variation of poker that is similar to Texas Hold'em, but with some important differences. In Omaha, each player is dealt 4 whole cards instead of 2. However, when forming a final hand, players must use exactly 2 of their 4 whole cards in combination with exactly 3 of the 5 community cards. This seemingly small rule change dramatically increases the complexity of the game and tends to produce much stronger hands at showdown, since players have more cards to work with. Fact 42. Seven-card stud was the dominant form of poker for much of the 20th century before Texas Hold'em rose to prominence. In seven-card stud, there is no dealer button and no community cards. Each player receives their own individual cards, some face down and some face up, across multiple rounds of dealing. The player showing the highest face-up card typically acts first in each betting round after the first. Stud requires a different set of skills from Hold'em, including the ability to remember cards that have already been seen and folded by other players. Fact 43. Raz is a lowball variant of seven-card stud in which the objective is to make the lowest possible five-card hand rather than the highest. Straights and flushes do not count against you in Raz, and the best possible hand is ace 2-3 for 5, called the wheel. Raz can be particularly frustrating for those accustomed to standard hand rankings, because hands that would normally be considered strong are worthless, and hands that look terrible on the surface may actually be very powerful in the context of the game. Fact 44. Mixed games are poker formats that rotate through multiple different game types, often changing every orbit or every set number of hands. The most well-known mixed game format is HORSE, which cycles through Texas Hold'em, Omaha High-Low, Raz, seven-card stud, and seven-card stud 8 or better. Mixed games are often considered the truest test of overall poker skill, because a player must be proficient across all formats. The World Series of Poker features a HORSE event that is traditionally considered one of the most prestigious tournaments in the series. Fact 45. In high-low split games like Omaha High-Low or Stud 8 or better, the pot is divided between the player with the highest hand and the player with the lowest qualifying hand. To qualify for the low half of the pot, a player must have 5 unpaired cards all ranked 8 or below. Aces count as low. The best possible low hand is ace 2-3 4 5. A player who wins both the high and low halves of the pot is said to scoop, and scooping is always the most profitable outcome in a high-low game. Fact 46. Tells are physical or behavioral cues that players inadvertently give away during a hand, which observant opponents can use to gain information about the strength of their hand. Classic tells include things like shaking hands when a player makes a big bet, often a sign of excitement from a strong hand rather than nervousness, or a player who stares at the community cards when they miss and looks away when they hit. The most reliable tells are involuntary and consistent over time. However, experienced players are aware of common tells and may deliberately manufacture false ones to mislead opponents. Fact 47. Online poker eliminated most physical tells but introduced a new category of information: timing tells. In online poker, how quickly or slowly a player acts can convey information about their hand strength or decision-making process. A player who calls very quickly may have a drawing hand they are content with. A player who takes a long time before betting may genuinely be weighing a difficult decision, or they may be acting slowly to appear uncertain while holding a strong hand. Timing tells are less reliable than betting patterns, but they add another layer of information in the online environment. Fact 48. The rake is the fee taken by the house, whether a casino, poker room, or online platform, for hosting a poker game. In cash games, the rake is typically a small percentage of each pot, capped at a maximum amount. In tournaments, the rake is usually included in the buy-in as a separate fee. For example, a $100 plus $10 tournament means $100 goes into the prize pool and $10 goes to the house. The rake is the reason that even a winning player must win at a rate that exceeds the rake in order to be profitable over time. Fact 49. Bankroll management is the discipline of managing your money in a way that allows you to continue playing even during inevitable losing streaks. A general guideline for cash game players is to have at least 20 to 30 buy-ins for the level at which they are playing. For tournament players, the recommendation is typically much higher, 50 to 100 buy-ins, because tournament variance is significantly greater than cash game variance. Playing within your bankroll is not about being timid. It is about giving yourself enough margin to survive the natural swings of the game without going broke. Fact 50. Tilt is the term used to describe the mental state in which a player makes poor decisions as a result of emotional frustration, typically following a bad beat or a run of bad luck. A player on tilt may call too many bets, bluff too frequently, or play hands they would normally fold, all because they are trying to win back money or vent frustration through action. Recognizing when you are on tilt and having the discipline to either reset your mental state or leave the table altogether is one of the most important non-technical skills in poker. Fact 51. A bad beat is when a player with a statistically dominant hand loses to an opponent who catches one of the very few cards that can beat them. For example, if you hold 2 aces and your opponent holds 2 fours, and the board comes 4 for 2-3 jack, giving your opponent 4 fours, that is a bad beat. Bad beats are a natural part of poker because any hand, no matter how strong, has some probability of losing. Learning to accept bad beats without emotional reaction is essential to long-term success. Fact 52. The concept of equity refers to your share of the pot based on your current probability of winning the hand. If you are a 70% favorite to win a pot worth $100, your equity in that pot is $70. Understanding equity helps you evaluate whether a bet, call, or fold is the correct decision. Equity is not fixed. It changes with every card that is dealt and every piece of new information you receive about your opponent's hand. Good players are constantly reassessing their equity as the hand progresses. Fact 53. Variance is the statistical term for the natural fluctuations in results that occur in any game involving chance. Even a skilled poker player who makes consistently correct decisions will experience long stretches of losing due to variance. This is one of the most psychologically challenging aspects of poker. The feedback loop between decisions and outcomes is noisy and unreliable in the short term. Professional players understand that their results over any given session or week or even month may not accurately reflect the quality of their decisions. Fact 54. The concept of implied odds extends the idea of pot odds to include chips that are not yet in the pot, but that you expect to win if you complete your hand. For example, if you have a flush draw and the pot odds alone do not justify calling, but you believe your opponent will make a large bet on the river if your flush card comes, those anticipated future winnings improve your effective odds. Implied odds are always estimates rather than certainties, and they depend on reading your opponent well enough to predict how they will behave if you complete your draw. Fact 55. Reverse implied odds are the opposite concept. They account for the chips you are likely to lose on future streets if you make your hand but your opponent makes a better hand. For example, if you make a low flush on the river but your opponent has a higher flush, you may lose a large amount of money at precisely the moment when you feel most confident. Hands that are vulnerable to being dominated, like small flushes or the low end of a straight, have poor reverse implied odds and should often be played more cautiously than their raw equity alone would suggest. Fact 56. Table selection is the practice of choosing which poker game or table to sit at based on the skill level of the other players. In a casino or online environment, you often have a choice of multiple tables at the same stakes. Sitting at a table full of weak or inexperienced players dramatically improves your long-term profitability compared to sitting at a table of skilled regulars. Professional players and serious amateurs invest time in identifying soft games and consistently choosing the most profitable environments, recognizing that who you play against matters as much as how you play. Fact 57. Seat selection within a table also matters. Within a given game, certain seats are more advantageous than others depending on the playing styles of your opponents. You generally want to have aggressive players to your right, where they act before you, so that you can see their bets and raises before committing chips. You want passive players to your left, where you act before them, so that you can bet and raise without fear of being re-raised. Optimal seat selection requires observation and patience, but it is a meaningful edge over time. Fact 58. Limping refers to calling the big blind preflop rather than raising. While limping is not inherently incorrect in all situations, it is generally considered a weak play in no-limit Texas Hold'em because it fails to take advantage of the opportunity to put pressure on opponents, does not define your hand range, and typically results in multi-way pots where your equity is diluted. Open limping, being the first player to enter the pot by calling rather than raising, is widely discouraged at competitive tables. Fact 59. The 3-bet is a raise that comes in response to a raise. The original bet is the first bet, the raise is the second bet, and the 3-bet is the third. In modern poker, 3-betting is used both for value, with very strong hands, and as a bluff or semi-bluff to apply pressure. A player who 3-bets frequently is called an aggressive player. 3-bet ranges and frequencies vary enormously depending on position, opponent tendencies, and stack sizes. Fact 60. The 4-bet is a raise in response to a 3-bet. 4-bets are typically associated with very strong hands or very committed bluffs because they represent an enormous commitment of chips. When facing a 4-bet, most players will fold everything except their strongest hands. This creates an interesting dynamic. Because 4-bets are taken so seriously, some players include bluff 4-bets in their range specifically to prevent opponents from 3-betting too liberally. Fact 61. Squeeze plays are a specific type of 3-bet made when there is one raiser and one or more callers before you. Because the callers in the middle are in a difficult position, they would need to call a large raise cold after already committing chips. A squeeze play puts enormous pressure on the entire table. Squeeze plays are most effective when the original raiser is likely to fold to aggression and the cold callers are likely to give up their chips rather than play a large pot out of position. Fact 62. Donk betting is the term used when a player in early position bets into the player who is the aggressor on the previous street, rather than checking to them. For example, if your opponent raised before the flop, you would normally check the flop and let them bet. This is the conventional line. Donk betting is considered unusual and often signals a specific type of hand. While donk betting was historically dismissed as a mistake, modern players recognize that it can be part of a balanced and effective strategy in the right situations. Fact 63. Floating refers to calling a bet on one street with the intention of taking the pot away with a bluff on a later street, regardless of your own hand's strength. For example, you might call a continuation bet on the flop with a weak hand, planning to bet if your opponent checks the turn, which often signals weakness. Floating is a counter-strategy to aggressive continuation betting and is most effective against players who bet the flop frequently but give up on the turn when called. Fact 64. The term nuts refers to the best possible hand given the community cards on the board. If you hold the nuts, you cannot be beaten. Having the nuts gives you freedom to bet for maximum value without any fear of losing the hand. Conversely, when an opponent bets very aggressively on a board that contains many strong possible hands, assessing whether they might have the nuts is an essential part of deciding how to respond. Fact 65. Blockers are cards in your hand that reduce the probability that your opponent holds a specific hand. For example, if you hold the ace of spades and the board has 3 spades, you are blocking the nut flush because your opponent cannot hold the best possible flush if you already hold the highest spade. Blockers are a sophisticated concept used in advanced poker strategy, particularly when deciding whether to bluff in spots where your opponent's likely hand range is narrow and specific. Fact 66. The gap concept, introduced by poker author David Sklonsky, states that it takes a stronger hand to call a raise than to make the original raise yourself. This is because the raiser has shown strength, and to call, you must believe your hand is strong enough to beat the range of hands they are raising with. The gap concept reinforces the idea that calling should be done selectively and that there is often more value in raising than in calling. Fact 67. Polarized and merged ranges describe 2 different philosophies about which hands to bet with in certain situations. A polarized range consists of very strong hands and bluffs, with nothing in between. The player is either betting for value or bluffing. A merged range includes strong hands, medium hands, and some bluffs, a wider variety of holdings. Understanding when opponents are likely to be polarized versus merged helps you make better decisions about how to respond to their bets and raises. Fact 68. Minimum defense frequency, or MDF, is a mathematical concept that helps players determine how often they need to continue against a bet in order to prevent their opponent from profiting with a pure bluff. If a player folds too often in response to bets, their opponents can bluff profitably with any 2 cards. MDF provides a theoretical floor for how often you should call or raise, based purely on the size of the bet relative to the pot, ensuring that bluffing is never automatically profitable regardless of hand strength. Fact 69. The Independent Chip Model, or ICM, is a framework used in tournament poker to calculate the real dollar value of tournament chips. Because tournament chips do not have a fixed dollar value, finishing second pays more than finishing third, finishing first pays substantially more than finishing second. The value of each chip depends on context. ICM calculations influence strategy near the money bubble and at the final table, where the goal shifts from chip accumulation to survival and pay jump optimization. Fact 70. The money bubble in a tournament is the point just before the remaining players all reach the prize money. If a tournament pays the top 100 players, the bubble is when 101 players remain. The dynamics near the bubble are fascinating. Short-stack players are desperate to survive, and big-stack players can exploit this by applying relentless pressure, since smaller stacks cannot afford to risk elimination before reaching the payout. Fact 71. Satellite tournaments are smaller buy-in tournaments where the prize is not cash, but rather a seat in a larger, more expensive tournament. The World Series of Poker main event, which carries a $10,000 buy-in, is famously accessible through satellites that may cost only $100 or less. The legendary poker player Chris Moneymaker won his seat to the 2003 main event through a $39 online satellite and went on to win the entire tournament, sparking a massive boom in poker's popularity worldwide. Fact 72. Staking is an arrangement where one party, the backer, provides the buy-in money for another player, the horse, in exchange for a percentage of the winnings. Staking is common in the poker world because it allows skilled players who lack bankroll to play at higher stakes, and it allows backers to invest in a player's skill without playing themselves. Staking arrangements usually specify the percentage split of profits after the horse has paid back the original investment, a condition called clearing makeup. Fact 73. Running it twice is an option sometimes offered in cash games when two players are all in and agree to deal the remaining community cards twice, splitting the pot based on the results of each run. Running it twice does not change the long-term expected value of either player. Over many instances, the results average out, but it reduces the short-term variance for both players. Many professional cash game players prefer to run it twice, or even 3 times to smooth out swings and preserve their bankroll for the long game. Fact 74. Chopping the blinds is a common informal agreement in many live cash games. When everyone folds around to the small blind and the big blind, the two players may agree to simply take back their blinds rather than play the hand. This saves time and avoids a small, uninteresting pot. Some players always chop, others never do, and the etiquette around chopping varies by game and setting. In tournaments, chopping is generally not permitted, as all hands must be played. Fact 75. String betting is an illegal move in live poker where a player makes a bet in multiple motions. For example, putting in some chips and then reaching back for more, without declaring the full amount in advance. String bets are not allowed because they can be used to gauge an opponent's reaction before committing the full amount. In live play, the standard rule is that you must either declare your full bet amount verbally before acting, or put all the chips into the pot in a single fluid motion. Fact 76. Angle shooting refers to a set of borderline unethical tactics designed to gain an unfair advantage through deception or by exploiting technicalities. Examples include falsely declaring a hand's strength to see an opponent's reaction, deliberately acting out of turn to gain information, or ambiguously moving chips toward the pot to provoke a response. Angle shooting is generally frowned upon in serious poker communities. It is not necessarily illegal in the strictest sense, but players who engage in it habitually damage their reputation and are often unwelcome at games. Fact 77. The Hendon Mob database is one of the largest publicly available records of live poker tournament results and prize winnings. It tracks the career earnings and results of professional and serious amateur poker players from tournaments around the world. As of recent years, Justin Bonomo held the record for the highest all-time live tournament earnings, with winnings exceeding $60 million. The database is a useful resource for researching opponents before playing in tournaments where their history and tendencies may be on record. Fact 78. Poker has a rich and contested history. The game is widely believed to have evolved from a combination of earlier card games, including the Persian game as-Naz, the French game Poc, and various European gambling games that were popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. The game was spread widely along the Mississippi River by riverboat gamblers in the 1800s and became deeply embedded in American frontier culture. The exact origins of the modern game remain a subject of debate among historians, but its American roots are undeniable. Fact 79. The World Series of Poker, commonly abbreviated as WSOP, is the most prestigious series of poker tournaments in the world. It was first held in 1970 at Binion's Horseshoe Casino in Las Vegas with a small group of professional gamblers. It has grown over the decades into an event that draws tens of thousands of players from around the world each summer, with hundreds of individual tournaments and a main event that routinely awards its winner several $1 million. Winning a WSOP gold bracelet is considered the highest achievement in competitive poker. Fact 80. Phil Hellmuth holds the record for the most World Series of Poker bracelet wins, with 17 bracelets as of 2024. He is also famous for his dramatic and emotional reactions to bad beats, which have become a fixture of televised poker. Despite his sometimes controversial behavior at the table, his longevity and consistency in tournament poker across 4 decades represent a remarkable career. He won his first bracelet in 1989 when he became the youngest main event champion in history at age 24. Fact 81. Doyle Brunson is considered one of the founding fathers of modern poker. He won the World Series of Poker main event back-to-back in 1976 and 1977, both times holding a 10 and a 2 in his hand for the final hand, a coincidence that made the 10-2 combination famous in poker lore. Brunson also wrote a highly influential book on poker strategy called Super System, published in 1979, which is widely regarded as one of the most important works in poker literature and is still read and referenced today. Fact 82. Stu Ungar is often cited as the most naturally gifted poker player in history. He won the World Series of Poker main event 3 times, in 1980, 1981, and 1997, a feat unmatched by any other player. He had an extraordinary ability to read hands and opponents, and he reportedly relied very little on mathematical calculation, instead playing almost entirely on instinct and observation. Despite his exceptional talent, Ungar struggled profoundly with substance abuse throughout his life and died in 1998 at the age of 45 with almost nothing to his name. Fact 83. The poker hand known as the dead man's hand consists of 2 black aces and 2 black eights. According to legend, this was the hand that Wild Bill Hickok was holding when he was shot and killed at a poker table in Deadwood, South Dakota, on August 2, 1876. The identity of the 5th card in his hand remains unknown and is a matter of ongoing historical debate. The dead man's hand has become one of the most iconic pieces of poker folklore and is referenced frequently in books, films, and popular culture. Fact 84. Poker strategy has been profoundly transformed by the development of solver software over the past decade. Solvers are computer programs that use game theory to calculate mathematically optimal strategies for poker situations, often reaching what is called a Nash equilibrium, a state in which neither player can improve their results by changing their strategy, assuming the opponent also plays optimally. While no human can fully replicate a solver's output in real time, studying solver solutions has given serious players a rigorous framework for understanding theoretically correct play and identifying leaks in their own strategy. Fact 85. Game theory optimal play, commonly known as GTO, is a style of play that aims to be unexploitable by an opponent who is also playing perfectly. A player using a pure GTO strategy cannot be taken advantage of over the long run, because their range is balanced across all situations. However, GTO play is not always the most profitable strategy against weaker opponents who make systematic mistakes. An exploitative strategy, one that deliberately targets and punishes specific weaknesses in an opponent, can outperform GTO play against players who deviate significantly from optimal decisions. Fact 86. The concept of a balanced range means that a player bets, checks, calls, raises, and folds across a variety of hand strengths in a given spot, so that opponents cannot exploit them by always assuming a specific bet means a specific hand type. For example, if you always check raise with only your strongest hands, observant opponents will fold whenever you check raise. But if you include some bluffs in your check-raising range, opponents can never be sure whether you are strong or bluffing, making your check raises much harder to counter. Fact 87. Position is so fundamentally important in no-limit Texas Hold'em that many experienced players will fold hands from early position that they would raise with from late position. Playing in position, meaning you act after your opponent, allows you to see what they do before committing chips, to control the size of the pot more easily, and to bluff more effectively because you have the last say on each street. The positional advantage compounds across every street of the hand, making it one of the most consistently valuable resources in the game. Fact 88. The cutoff is the position immediately to the right of the dealer button, and is considered the second most advantageous position at the table. Players in the cutoff act second to last in most betting rounds, giving them nearly as much positional advantage as the button. Strong players tend to play a wide range of hands from the cutoff, and are often competing directly with the button for control of the hand. Stealing the blinds, raising from the cutoff or button when the players to your left are likely to fold, is one of the bread-and-butter plays of winning poker. Fact 89. The hijack is the position 2 seats to the right of the dealer button. It gets its name from the idea that players in this position can steal or hijack the positional advantage before the cutoff and button get to act. As poker strategy has evolved and players have become more aggressive, the range of hands played from the hijack has expanded considerably. In modern high-stakes play, stealing from the hijack is routine, and the players in the cutoff and button must respond with wider defending and 3-betting ranges as a result. Fact 90. Under the gun, abbreviated UEG, is the position immediately to the left of the big blind, the player who must act first in the preflop betting round. Being under the gun is the most disadvantageous position at a 9-handed table because you must act before all other players with virtually no information. For this reason, the recommended opening range from under the gun is the narrowest of any position, consisting primarily of strong hands that can withstand aggression from the many players yet to act behind you. Fact 91. Limping in from the small blind when everyone else has folded and only the big blind remains is a common and debated play. Because the small blind has already invested half a big blind and is heads up against one opponent, some players feel it is worthwhile to limp in to see a cheap flop. However, other players argue that raising is almost always preferable because it applies pressure on the big blind and allows you to potentially take the pot immediately, regardless of what cards you are holding. Fact 92. Open-face Chinese poker, known as OFC, is a variant of poker that differs significantly from community card games. Each player builds 3 separate hands, 2 5-card hands and 1 3-card hand, by placing cards from a single dealt hand into specific rows. The hand must be arranged so that the bottom row is the strongest and the top row is the weakest, or else the hand is declared fouled and the player loses automatically. OFC is popular among high-stakes players between sessions of traditional poker and has a dedicated competitive community of its own. Fact 93. Video poker is a casino machine game that is based on 5-card draw poker and played against the machine rather than other players. Unlike slot machines, video poker has a skill component. The decisions you make about which cards to hold and which to discard genuinely affect your expected return. Certain video poker machines, when played with optimal strategy, offer a return-to-player rate that is very close to or even exceeds 100%. Skilled video poker players study pay tables and optimal holding strategies to identify the most favorable machines. Fact 94. The term fish refers informally to a weak or inexperienced poker player who loses money regularly and provides profit to the better players at the table. The term is not particularly kind, but it is widely used in poker culture. A related concept is the saying that if you sit down at a poker table and cannot identify the fish, you might be the fish. The point is that self-awareness about your relative skill level compared to your opponents is essential for making rational decisions about which games to play in and at what stakes. Fact 95. A regular, often called a reg, is a player who plays frequently at a particular level or in a particular room and is generally considered to be a competent, experienced player. Regulars often know each other's tendencies well from repeated interactions, which can make the game more complex and the edges smaller. Games with many regulars and few recreational players are generally less profitable for any individual player, which is why serious players prioritize finding games with a high proportion of recreational participants. Fact 96. Running deep in a tournament refers to lasting into the later stages of the competition, making it to the final table or close to it. Running deep requires not only skill, but also the ability to manage variance over a long period, sometimes 10 to 14 hours in a single day for large live tournaments. Players who consistently run deep tend to have strong fundamentals across all stack sizes, solid mental endurance, and the ability to adapt their strategy as the field narrows and the dynamics change at each table. Fact 97. The final table of a major poker tournament is one of the most high-pressure environments in competitive gambling. Each elimination means a significant pay jump, and the dynamics among players who may have very different stack sizes can be complex and delicate. Final table deals, where remaining players agree to divide the prize pool based on their current chip counts before the tournament concludes, are common at lower and mid-level events but less accepted at major televised championships where the prestige of finishing first carries its own value. Fact 98. Heads-up poker, played between just two players, is considered by many experts to be the most skill-intensive form of the game. With only two participants, there is nowhere to hide. Every hand must be played, position switches with every deal, and the game becomes a highly personal psychological contest. Heads-up specialists train extensively in this format and approach it with very different strategic frameworks than those used in full-ring or six-handed games. Being comfortable playing heads-up is also essential in the final stages of any tournament. Fact 99. The term cooler describes a hand where two or more players each have a very strong hand, typically the second best and best possible holdings on a given board, and the outcome is essentially unavoidable. For example, if you hold two kings and your opponent holds two aces, and neither player folds preflop, the result is largely predetermined. Coolers are distinguished from bad beats by the fact that neither player made an error. Both played correctly, but the outcome was determined by the distribution of cards. Fact 100. Poker, unlike many casino games, is not played against the house. It is played against other people. This fundamental difference means that the skill of your opponents, rather than a fixed house edge, determines how much of a disadvantage or advantage you operate under. In blackjack or roulette, the house edge is fixed and inescapable. In poker, a genuinely skilled player can profit over the long run precisely because they are competing against other people, some of whom make mistakes, and exploiting those mistakes consistently is the source of profit. Fact 101. Reading the board is the skill of quickly and accurately identifying the best possible hand on any given combination of community cards and understanding how likely any player at the table is to have that hand. An experienced player scanning the board can immediately see whether a flush is possible, what the best straight is, whether the board is paired, and how coordinated or disconnected the cards are. This skill develops with practice and is fundamental to evaluating both your own hand strength and the danger posed by your opponent's potential holdings. Fact 102. Wet boards are community card textures that contain many possible strong draws and combinations. For example, a board of 8 of hearts, 9 of hearts, 10 of clubs gives players the possibility of straights, flush draws, and straight flush draws simultaneously. Dry boards are the opposite, disconnected, unsuited cards that offer very few drawing possibilities. How wet or dry a board is dramatically affects how players should bet and how much credit they should give opponents' actions. Strong bets on wet boards can have very different meanings than the same bets on dry boards. Fact 103. Board runouts refer to the sequence in which community cards arrive, and they can dramatically shift the advantage from one player to another in a single moment. A player who is a huge favorite after the flop may fall behind after the turn, only to recover on the river, or vice versa. Tracking how the strength of your hand changes across the runout, and adjusting your betting accordingly, is a core skill that separates players who merely understand hand rankings from those who understand the dynamic, evolving nature of each hand. Fact 104. Protecting your hand is a concept that involves betting or raising to reduce the chances that an opponent with a drawing hand will see free cards that could beat you. If you have a strong made hand like top pair on a draw-heavy board, checking and allowing your opponent to see the turn and river for free gives them equity they have not paid for. By betting, you either charge them for the draw or force them to fold, both of which are better outcomes than allowing them a free opportunity to improve. Fact 105. The concept of thin value refers to betting with a hand that is likely winning, but is not a dominant favorite. You are extracting value from your opponent's calling range, even though there are hands they might call with that beat you. Betting thin value requires confident hand reading and a willingness to sometimes find yourself in a difficult spot when called. Over time, however, correctly identifying and betting thin value situations adds up to meaningful additional profit for players willing to make those finely calibrated decisions. Fact 106. Multi-tabling is the practice of playing multiple poker tables simultaneously, primarily in online poker. Some online professionals play 12, 16, or even more tables at the same time, processing dozens of decisions per hour. Multi-tabling increases the volume of hands played and allows skilled players to accumulate profit more quickly, but it comes at the cost of attention per table. There is a trade-off between playing more tables and playing each table at full quality, and finding the right balance is an important part of online poker optimization. Fact 107. Heads-up displays, commonly called HUDs, are software tools used in online poker that overlay real-time statistical data about opponents directly onto the poker table interface. A HUD can show information like an opponent's pre-flop raise frequency, how often they continuation bet, how frequently they fold to raises, and many other statistics derived from their past hands. HUDs are controversial. They give regular players a significant advantage over occasional players who generate less data, and many online poker sites have moved to restrict or ban their use in recent years. Fact 108. The concept of leveling, or thinking about what your opponent thinks you think, is a fascinating dimension of poker psychology. Level 1 thinking is simply about what cards you have. Level 2 thinking is about what cards your opponent has. Level 3 thinking is about what your opponent thinks you have. Level 4 is about what they think you think they have. Advanced players are constantly navigating multiple levels simultaneously, trying to play one level above their opponent, but also trying not to overthink against opponents who are not thinking at a high level at all. Fact 109. Poker literature has a rich tradition, and several books have had a profound influence on how the game is studied and understood. In addition to Doyle Brunson's Super System, key works include The Theory of Poker by David Sklonsky, which introduced many foundational concepts to a wide audience, and Harrington on Hold'em, a 3-volume series by two-time World Series of Poker champion Dan Harrington that became a standard text for tournament players in the mid-2000s. More recently, solver-based training materials and analytical software have supplemented traditional book learning. Fact 110. Chip dumping is a form of cheating in tournaments where one player deliberately loses chips to another, usually a partner, in order to give them a larger stack. It is most commonly seen in online tournaments where players at the same table can communicate outside the game, and it is strictly prohibited by all reputable poker sites and casinos. Chip dumping distorts the natural competitive dynamics of a tournament and harms all other players who earn their chip stacks through legitimate play. Fact 111. Collusion is any form of cooperation between two or more players at the same table to gain an unfair advantage over other players. Examples include sharing hand information, signaling card holdings, or soft playing. Avoiding confrontation with a partner by checking down hands that would normally be bet. Collusion is cheating in all forms and is taken very seriously by casinos and online poker operators, some of which use sophisticated algorithms to detect patterns consistent with collusive behavior. Fact 112. Solver-based study has revealed that many intuitively reasonable plays are actually significant strategic errors when analyzed rigorously. For example, many recreational players believe that checking a very strong hand on the river is always a viable way to trap an opponent. But solvers often indicate that strong hands should be bet for value in most river situations, because the additional chips won when called outweigh the occasional benefit of inducing a bluff. Studying solver output challenges long-held assumptions and continuously refines how strong players approach the game. Fact 113. Poker training sites became a significant industry in the late 2000s and 2010s, offering instructional videos, hand history reviews, and coaching from professional players. Sites like Card Runners and PokerStars Training attracted thousands of subscribers seeking to improve. More recently, platforms using solver-integrated study tools have become the standard for serious players. The availability of high-quality instructional material has raised the overall skill level of the poker-playing population, which is one reason the game has become progressively more challenging at most stakes over time. Fact 114. The rake structure in online poker is somewhat different from live poker. Online sites often collect the rake on every pot, even very small ones, and use a variety of models including percentage rake, fixed rake, and dealt rake systems. Because online hands are played much faster than live hands, often 10 times faster, the total rake collected per hour can be substantial. Many online poker sites offer rakeback programs or loyalty rewards that return a portion of the rake to frequent players, which can meaningfully affect the profitability of a regular grinder. Fact 115. The tell associated with bet sizing is one of the most reliable sources of information in live poker. Many players unconsciously bet larger with strong hands and smaller with weaker ones, or vice versa in a consistent way. Observing bet sizing patterns over the course of a session, rather than reading physical gestures, provides a more reliable and harder to fake source of information. Paying attention to whether an opponent's bet sizes are consistent across different hand strengths is one of the first habits a developing player should cultivate. Fact 116. Polarization of bet sizing means using very large bets or raises to represent either very strong hands or bluffs, and checking or using smaller bets with medium-strength hands. This strategy, endorsed by modern solver analysis, makes it difficult for opponents to exploit your betting patterns because large bets can come from both the top and bottom of your range. The logic is that medium-strength hands often benefit from pot control, keeping the pot small, while very strong hands and bluffs both benefit from using larger bet sizes. Fact 117. The mental game of poker refers to the psychological and emotional dimensions of play, managing tilt, handling variance, maintaining focus over long sessions, and developing confidence in your decisions. Jared Tendler, a mental game coach who has worked with many professional players, popularized the concept of bringing deliberate mental skills training to poker. His books argue that mental game leaks, emotional reactions that cause poor decisions, are just as damaging as strategic leaks and deserve the same level of analysis and correction. Fact 118. Professional poker is one of very few pursuits in the world where it is possible to earn a living through pure competition against other individuals, with no employer, fixed income, or safety net. This freedom is deeply appealing to a certain type of person, but it comes with significant psychological and financial demands. The lack of a steady paycheck, the isolation of many playing environments, and the constant exposure to variance require a level of self-discipline and emotional resilience that many underestimate when they first consider pursuing the game professionally. Fact 119. Short deck poker, also known as 6+ Hold'em, is a variation of Texas Hold'em played with a reduced deck of 36 cards. All cards ranked 5 and below are removed. This changes the mathematical structure of the game significantly. Flushes are harder to make than full houses, so the hand rankings are adjusted accordingly. A flush beats a full house in short deck. The game produces more action because players connect with the board more frequently, and it has become popular in high-stakes games among professional players seeking a fresh strategic challenge. Fact 120. Pineapple Poker and Crazy Pineapple are variations of Texas Hold'em in which each player receives 3 whole cards instead of 2. In Standard Pineapple, players discard 1 whole card before the flop betting round. In Crazy Pineapple, players keep all 3 cards through the flop and discard 1 before the turn. The additional whole card increases the average strength of hands dealt and creates more interesting pre-flop decisions, as players must choose which card to give up based on how the flop has connected with their holdings. Fact 121. The World Poker Tour, known as the WPT, is a series of international poker tournaments that gained wide recognition through its television broadcasts in the early 2000s. The WPT popularized the use of whole card cameras, which allowed television viewers to see the players' private cards during broadcasts. This innovation transformed poker from a confusing spectator experience into a gripping dramatic narrative, where viewers could see exactly what each player was holding and appreciate the complexity of the decisions being made in real time. Fact 122. The concept of chip utility refers to the diminishing strategic value of each additional chip as your stack grows very large. The first chips you accumulate in a tournament are the most precious. They keep you alive. As your stack grows, each additional chip becomes slightly less valuable in isolation, because you already have security and flexibility. This idea, formalized in the independent chip model, influences decisions about whether to risk a large portion of your stack in borderline situations. The cost of losing chips is often greater than the benefit of gaining the same amount. Fact 123. Flatting or flat calling. A 3-bet refers to calling a 3-bet rather than either folding or re-raising. Flatting 3-bets is a line that requires careful consideration of position, stack depth, and hand strength. In position, flatting a 3-bet with a speculative hand, like a suited connector, can be appropriate because the potential to win a large pot if you hit the board justifies the investment. Out of position, Flatting 3-bets is more difficult because you will have to act first on every subsequent street without the informational advantage of seeing your opponent act. Fact 124. Overbetting is the practice of betting more than the size of the pot. While conventional wisdom once suggested that large overbets were unusual or suspicious, modern solver analysis has shown that overbetting is theoretically justified in specific situations, particularly on river cards that strongly favor one player's range. When a card arrives that is much more likely to have helped your range than your opponent's range, an overbet can be a powerful tool to extract maximum value or execute a high-pressure bluff. Fact 125. The concept of a probe bet describes a small bet made out of position on the turn after both players check the flop. When the preflop aggressor checks the flop, it often signals a weak or medium hand. If the preflop caller then bets the turn before their opponent, the probe bet, they are testing whether the preflop aggressor was genuinely weak on the flop or was setting a trap. Probe bets are a way of taking the initiative in situations where the conventional line would be to check and give the opponent another free card. Fact 126. Deep stack poker, where players have many hundreds of big blinds rather than the typical 100 big blind standard, changes the game significantly. With very deep stacks, speculative hands like small pocket pairs and suited connectors gain value because the implied odds of hitting a big hand are enormous. Conversely, hands like one pair become more vulnerable because opponents have enough chips to represent very strong hands convincingly across multiple streets. Deep stack play rewards patience, hand reading, and a willingness to commit to strong hands over the full length of a hand. Fact 127. Poker etiquette in live settings includes a set of generally understood conventions that keep the game running smoothly and respectfully. Players are expected to act in turn, not reveal their cards to active players, refrain from excessive celebration after winning a hand, and avoid slow rolling, deliberately taking a long time to show a clearly winning hand at showdown to embarrass an opponent. While not all of these conventions are formal rules, violating them can create a hostile atmosphere and is generally considered poor sportsmanship. Fact 128. The importance of table image cannot be overstated in live poker. Table image refers to how other players at the table perceive your playing style. Whether they see you as tight and conservative, loose and aggressive, or deceptive and unpredictable. Your table image affects how opponents respond to your bets and raises. A player with a tight image can often bluff successfully because opponents assume they only bet with strong hands. A player with a loose image may find their bluffs called more frequently, but can extract more value from strong hands because opponents are more willing to call. Fact 129. Hand histories are written or digital records of how a hand was played, including every action taken by every player on every street. Reviewing hand histories, either your own or those studied in training materials, is one of the most effective ways to identify and correct strategic errors. Many serious players dedicate significant time away from the table to reviewing hands, especially in spots where they were uncertain about the correct play. The practice of off-table study distinguishes serious students of the game from those who rely solely on in-game experience. Fact 130. The fish hook is an informal term for the jack, the card that follows 10 in the standard deck. Similarly, poker has developed a rich vocabulary of nicknames for specific hands and card combinations. Pocket aces are known as rockets or bullets. Pocket kings are cowboys. Pocket queens are ladies. King 9 is often called the K9 due to its phonetic resemblance. Ace king is big slick. These nicknames reflect the culture and humor that is built up around the game over generations of play. Fact 131. When you are one of the last players to act before the big blind in the preflop round and everyone has folded, you are in what is known as the stealing position. Raising with a wide range of hands in this spot, the cutoff, the button, or the small blind, in an attempt to win the blinds uncontested is called stealing. Blind stealing is a routine part of winning poker because picking up the blinds without a contest adds chips steadily, and the player in position after the flop has a significant advantage even when called. Fact 132. Defending the big blind refers to the decision to call or raise a preflop raise when you are in the big blind position. Because you have already invested a full big blind, you are getting better pot odds to call than any other position at the table, which means you can defend with a wider range of hands. Modern poker theory suggests that big blind defense ranges should be quite broad to prevent players from stealing blinds too cheaply, even if many of those defended hands will be out of position and require careful post-flop play. Fact 133. Squeeze plays, mentioned earlier in a different context, are particularly effective against recreational players who call raises liberally pre-flop. When there is one raiser and one or more recreational callers who are unlikely to defend strongly against a large 3-bet, the squeeze exploits both the original raiser, who may fold a wide range, and the callers, who are in a very uncomfortable position with a hand they were not ready to commit many chips with. The squeeze play is a powerful weapon when used selectively and in the right game conditions. Fact 134. Folding equity is the portion of a bet's expected value that comes from the chance that your opponent will fold and you will win the pot immediately without going to showdown. Bluffs and semi-bluffs derive their profitability largely from folding equity. In situations where you have very little folding equity, for example, when your opponent has shown extreme strength by betting aggressively across multiple streets, bluffing becomes less attractive because the probability that they fold is low. Fact 135. The concept of a blocking bet is a small bet made out of position on the river, typically by a player with a medium-strength hand, designed to control the price of seeing a showdown. By betting a small amount themselves, the player discourages their opponent from making a large bet, because the opponent now faces the choice of raising, calling, or folding rather than making the first bet. A successful blocking bet allows the player to get to showdown cheaply, protecting against a large bluff or value bet they would otherwise have to call or fold to. Fact 136. The term donkey, or simply donk, is sometimes used colloquially to describe a poor or inexperienced poker player, someone who makes frequent fundamental errors. It is related to the donk bet described earlier, which was originally named because it was seen as a tell of inexperience. While the term is used informally within the poker community, it is considered rude and dismissive, and using it openly at the table is generally poor form. Treating inexperienced players with respect is both good etiquette and sound strategy, since making them feel unwelcome reduces the supply of recreational players in the game. Fact 137. Set mining is the strategy of calling a pre-flop raise with a small or medium pocket pair with the intention of flopping a set, 3 of a kind using both whole cards. A set is an extremely powerful hand that is often well disguised, since the pair in your hand is not visible to opponents. The strategy requires deep enough stack sizes that the implied odds justify the call. The expected payout when you do hit your set must be large enough to compensate for the roughly 8-to-1 odds of flopping one. Fact 138. Suited connectors are whole cards that are both of the same suit and consecutive in rank, for example, the 7 and 8 of diamonds. They are popular speculative hands because they can make both straights and flushes, the 2 hands that are hardest to detect. Suited connectors rarely make top pair with a strong kicker, so they are generally played for their ability to make hidden, disguised big hands rather than for their pair potential. When they miss, which is most of the time, they are easy to fold and the loss is small. Fact 139. Poker has been studied extensively by computer scientists and artificial intelligence researchers. In 2015, a program called Logistical was one of the first AI systems to challenge professional poker players at Heads Up No Limit Texas Hold'em. While Logistical lost narrowly to the professionals' subsequent systems, most notably Libratus in 2017 and Pluribus in 2019, demonstrated that AI could play at a superhuman level. Pluribus, developed by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University and Facebook AI Research, was the first AI to defeat multiple elite human professionals simultaneously at a full 6-player table. Fact 140. The psychological concept of loss aversion has a particularly powerful effect on poker players. Loss aversion, identified by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, is the tendency for people to feel the pain of a loss more acutely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. At the poker table, this can manifest as a reluctance to make correct folds when a player has already invested a significant amount of chips in the pot, a phenomenon related to the sunk cost fallacy. Recognizing that chips already in the pot no longer belong to you, and that decisions should be made based solely on future expected value, is one of the most important mental adjustments a developing player must make. Fact 141. The term snap call describes a call made almost instantaneously, without visible hesitation. A snap call typically indicates a very strong hand. The player called so quickly because the decision was easy given the strength of their holding. Conversely, a long pause before calling or raising can indicate genuine uncertainty, though experienced players sometimes deliberately pause to disguise the strength of their hands. Understanding the timing of your opponent's actions provides a useful, if imperfect, source of information in live play. Fact 142. The poker concept of balance applies not just to which hands you bet with, but to how you play each hand across all possible situations. A balanced player makes each decision at frequencies that prevent any specific counter-strategy from being profitable against them. In theory, a perfectly balanced player cannot be exploited. In practice, achieving perfect balance against opponents who are themselves making mistakes is often suboptimal. But building a fundamentally balanced foundation prevents the most glaring exploits and creates a solid baseline from which to make targeted adjustments. Fact 143. Poker has a long and well-documented relationship with mathematics, and many of the game's most influential thinkers have been as comfortable with numbers as they are with cards. John von Neumann, one of the most important mathematicians of the 20th century, included a formal analysis of simplified poker in his foundational work on game theory in the 1940s. He was among the first to recognize that bluffing is not irrational or reckless, but is in fact the mathematically correct strategy in certain situations, a finding that formalized what experienced players had always understood intuitively. Fact 144. The rake in live casino poker is one reason that low-stakes games can be very difficult to beat over the long term. In a $1/$2 no-limit game, where the maximum buy-in might be $300, the rake on each pot can represent a significant percentage of the money in play. A player who wins slightly more than their share of pots will still lose money over time if the rake exceeds their edge. Many serious low-stakes players focus on playing at card rooms with favorable rake structures, taking advantage of promotions and bonuses, or moving up in stakes as their skills improve. Fact 145. Poker and probability are inseparable. Understanding the basic mathematics of the game, how many cards remain in the deck, how likely you are to improve your hand, what hands your opponent might hold, provides a framework for making rational decisions in a game full of uncertainty. You do not need to perform complex calculations in real time, but having a solid intuitive sense of relative probabilities allows you to avoid the most common mathematical errors, such as drawing to a hand whose odds do not justify the cost of the call. Fact 146. Home poker games have their own culture, etiquette, and traditions that often differ from casino play. In many home games, dealer's choice allows each player who is dealing to choose the variant of poker to be played for that hand or orbit. This creates a diverse and casual atmosphere where unusual variants, including games with wild cards, split-pot games, and variations invented on the spot, are part of the fun. Home games often serve as the entry point through which many players first encounter poker and develop their initial love of the game. Fact 147. The story of poker in the 21st century is largely the story of the internet. Online poker allowed players to accumulate thousands of hands of experience in a fraction of the time it would take in a live setting, dramatically accelerating the development of a new generation of technically proficient players. The online poker boom of the early 2000s, followed by the legal and regulatory challenges of the late 2000s and 2010s, created a turbulent but transformative period for the game. The landscape of online poker continues to evolve as different countries regulate the game in different ways and new platforms emerge. Fact 148. The concept of metagame refers to how the broader context of your ongoing interactions with specific opponents influences the decisions you make in individual hands. If you have been caught bluffing several times in a row, your table image is damaged and opponents are more likely to call your bets, which means you should shift toward betting for value more often. If you have been running very tight and only playing strong hands, opponents are giving you credit you can exploit with bluffs. Metagame awareness means constantly considering not just the current hand, but the entire history of your interactions with each opponent. Fact 149. Poker is one of a small number of games where it is genuinely possible to be a long-term winner through skill. Unlike casino games like roulette, craps, or slots, where the house edge makes long-term profit impossible for the player, poker's outcome over time is determined by the collective skill differential between players, minus the rake. This does not mean poker is easy to beat. The rake is real, the variance is high, and the competition has improved significantly, but it does mean that the game rewards study, discipline, and sustained effort in a way that purely chance-based games never can. Fact 150. Ultimately, poker is a game played between human beings, and the human element is what makes it endlessly fascinating. No two sessions are alike. No two opponents are identical. Every hand is a small problem to be solved with incomplete information, under time pressure, and with real consequences. The great players are not simply better at math or more knowledgeable about strategy. They are also more patient, more emotionally resilient, more observant, and more adaptable than their opponents. Poker rewards the full range of human intelligence, and that is why, after more than a century and a half, it remains one of the most compelling and widely played games in the world. Fact 151. The term cooler and the term bad beat are often confused, but they describe meaningfully different situations. A bad beat occurs when a player with a strong statistical advantage loses to an opponent who catches one of the few cards that can beat them. The outcome defies the odds. A cooler, by contrast, is a situation where both players have very strong hands and the result is essentially unavoidable regardless of how either player acts. Being dealt 2 kings against 2 aces is a cooler. Flopping a flush and losing to a flopped full house is a cooler. Neither player made an error, and neither could reasonably have escaped the situation. Fact 152. The button steal is one of the most fundamental and frequently executed plays in no-limit Texas Hold'em. When the action folds around to the player on the dealer button, they are in a position to raise with a very wide range of hands, attempting to win the blinds uncontested. The small and big blind are out of position post-flop, which puts them at a structural disadvantage even if they call. Strong players on the button exploit this by raising frequently, sometimes with any 2 reasonably playable cards, forcing the blinds to defend wider or surrender chips steadily over the course of a long session. Fact 153. The concept of playing the player refers to making decisions based primarily on your read of a specific opponent rather than purely on the mathematical or theoretical strength of your hand. Against an opponent who never folds, bluffing loses its value and value betting becomes paramount. Against an opponent who folds too easily, bluffing becomes highly profitable regardless of what cards you hold. The ability to identify specific tendencies in individual opponents and adjust your strategy accordingly is one of the qualities that distinguishes a thoughtful player from one who plays a rigid, one-size-fits-all game. Fact 154. In tournament poker, the ante is an additional forced bet that all players post each hand, separate from the blinds. Antes increase the size of the pot before any cards are dealt, which creates more incentive to play aggressively and fight for the pot. In many modern tournaments, a big blind ante has replaced individual antes. One player, the big blind, posts a single large ante on behalf of the whole table. This streamlines the dealing process and keeps the game moving at a faster pace while achieving the same effect of increasing pot sizes and incentivizing action. Fact 155. The phrase "married to a hand" describes a common psychological trap in which a player becomes emotionally attached to a strong starting hand and continues to invest chips in the pot long after the evidence suggests their hand is beaten. A player who flops top set but faces multiple raises on a board that completes several possible straights and flushes may still be winning, or may be behind. The challenge is evaluating each situation objectively, rather than letting the initial excitement of a strong hand cloud your judgment about whether the situation has changed. Fact 156. In live poker, the physical act of protecting your hand is literally important. If you do not place a chip or object on top of your whole cards while they are on the table, the dealer may accidentally sweep them into the muck, the discard pile, while collecting folded hands. Once your cards are in the muck, they are generally considered dead, and you lose your right to win the pot, even if your hand would have been the best at showdown. Most experienced live players develop the habit of immediately placing something on their cards as a matter of routine. Fact 157. Poker statistics have become increasingly precise with the availability of large hand history databases. Solvers and database tools allow players to analyze their own play across thousands of hands, identifying patterns of error that would be invisible in a smaller sample. For example, a database might reveal that a player consistently loses money when calling 3 bets out of position with middle pairs, or that they fail to continuation bet often enough in single-raised pots. This kind of data-driven self-analysis has become a standard part of serious poker study. Fact 158. The term air in poker refers to a hand that has no value whatsoever. A complete bluff with no draws, no pair, and no realistic path to winning at showdown except by making the opponent fold. When a player is said to be betting air, they are representing a strong hand while holding nothing. The effectiveness of betting air depends entirely on the believability of the story being told by the betting line. If the sequence of bets and board textures makes a strong hand plausible, air can be very powerful. If the story is inconsistent, observant opponents will see through it. Fact 159. The World Series of Poker began awarding gold bracelets to event winners in 1976. Before that, from 1970 to 1975, champions received various trophies and prizes. The bracelet has become the most coveted symbol of achievement in competitive poker. Players who have won multiple bracelets, Phil Hellmuth with 17, Johnny Chon and Doyle Brunson each with 10, Phil Ivey with 10, are considered legends of the game. Even a single bracelet carries enormous prestige and serves as a career-defining accomplishment for most professional players. Fact 160. The term fish out of water in poker describes a player who is clearly out of their depth at a particular level or in a particular type of game. Not just a weak recreational player, but someone visibly struggling with game speed, betting norms, or strategic concepts they have not encountered before. Moving up in stakes too quickly without developing the appropriate skills often produces this feeling, and recognizing when you are the fish out of water is an important signal to step back, reassess, and return to a more comfortable level until your skills are genuinely ready for the next challenge. Fact 161. The three fundamental questions a poker player should ask themselves before making any decision are: what hands am I representing? What hands does my opponent likely have? And what action best achieves my goal given those two things? These questions sound simple, but answering them well requires deep knowledge of hand ranges, board textures, player tendencies, and positional dynamics. Players who habitually ask and answer these questions, even imperfectly, will make far better decisions than those who act primarily on impulse or on the strength of their cards alone. Fact 162. Straddles are optional additional blinds posted by a player before the cards are dealt, typically the player under the gun. A straddle is usually twice the size of the big blind and gives the straddler the option to act last preflop, effectively making them the temporary big blind. Straddles are common in live cash games and tend to increase the average pot size and the action level of the game. Some games allow multiple straddles, with each successive straddle doubling the size of the previous one, which can create very large pots before a single card is dealt. Fact 163. The concept of thin ice in poker describes a situation where a player is making a decision that is theoretically correct but requires very precise assumptions about their opponent's tendencies and range. A thin value bet on the river, a marginal call against an aggressive opponent, or a bluff in a spot where only a few specific hands fold. These are thin ice situations. They can be the right play when the reads are accurate, but they are unforgiving if those assumptions are wrong. Recognizing when you are on thin ice helps calibrate your confidence appropriately. Fact 164. One of the most common leaks for beginner and intermediate players is playing too many hands. The temptation to see every flop, to give every pair a chance, and to never let go of a hand that felt promising at the start leads to consistently losing money in situations where folding preflop would have been the correct and costless decision. Tightening starting hand selection, being willing to fold the large majority of hands dealt, is typically the single biggest improvement available to a player moving from beginner to intermediate level. Fact 165. Poker is one of the few competitive pursuits where you can do everything right and still lose, repeatedly, for extended periods of time. This is the nature of variance. A surgeon who operates skillfully gets a positive outcome. A chess player who plays the best moves wins. But a poker player who makes the best possible decisions on every street of every hand will still lose a meaningful percentage of those hands due to the random distribution of cards. Internalizing this fact, truly accepting it rather than just acknowledging it intellectually, is one of the deepest and most important challenges in the mental game. Fact 166. The practice of keeping a poker journal is recommended by many coaches and serious players as a way to accelerate learning. A poker journal might include notes on interesting hands played, observations about opponents, thoughts on strategic concepts you are working to improve, and reflections on your mental game. Writing about your experience engages a different kind of processing than simply replaying events in your head, and over time a journal becomes a valuable record of your development as a player and a reference for patterns you might otherwise forget. Fact 167. Pot geometry refers to the deliberate management of pot size across the streets of a hand through the sizing of your bets and raises. A player who wants to create a large pot by the river might use a small bet on the flop and a slightly larger bet on the turn, so that by the river the pot is big enough to justify a large all-in bet without that bet appearing disproportionate. Conversely, a player who wants to keep the pot small might check on some streets or use smaller bet sizes. Understanding how bet sizing on early streets shapes the pot on later streets is a hallmark of experienced play. Fact 168. The card room or poker room in a casino is a dedicated space designed specifically for table card games, primarily poker. Unlike other casino games, poker rooms do not have a built-in house edge on each hand. The house profits exclusively through the rake. This means the atmosphere in a poker room is often more player-friendly than other parts of a casino, with dealers who facilitate rather than compete against players, and a culture of competition between participants rather than between players and the house. Fact 169. Seat 0, or the dealer position in a heads-up game, is sometimes also called being in position or being on the button. In heads-up play, the button posts the small blind and acts first preflop, but acts last on all subsequent streets. This reversal of the usual preflop acting order in full-ring games can confuse players transitioning to heads-up play for the first time. The button's positional advantage on the flop, turn, and river is significant enough that the heads-up button is generally considered to have an overall strategic edge, which is reflected in the fact that strong heads-up players are often aggressive from this position. Fact 170. Poker streaks, both winning and losing, are a natural consequence of variance, but they can have a significant psychological effect on players who do not fully understand their statistical nature. A player on a winning streak may overestimate their skill level and move up in stakes prematurely. A player on a losing streak may doubt abilities that are genuinely sound. Evaluating your game based on the quality of your decisions rather than the short-term outcomes of those decisions is the only way to maintain an accurate and stable self-assessment. Fact 171. The concept of implied tilt odds is an extension of standard poker thinking into the mental game. When deciding whether to play a session or a particular game, it is worth considering not just the financial edge you have over the opponents, but also your current mental state. If you are tired, distracted, or already frustrated from a previous session, your effective edge is reduced because you are unlikely to play at your best. Sometimes the highest expected value decision is simply to not play at all, preserving both your bankroll and your mental energy for a session when you can compete at full capacity. Fact 172. The term nit describes a player who plays extremely tight, folding the vast majority of hands and only entering pots with strong holdings. Nits are generally unprofitable at serious games because their narrow range is easy to read, and they fail to take advantage of many profitable situations by folding too liberally. While tight play is generally better than loose play for beginners, extreme tightness becomes its own problem because opponents can fold whenever a nit bets, knowing with high confidence that they hold a strong hand. Fact 173. Overbetting the pot on the flop or turn is an advanced technique used primarily in spots where one player's range contains significantly more very strong hands than the others. By betting more than the pot, the aggressor forces the opponent into a difficult decision that exploits the imbalance in range strength. Overbetting was once considered unsophisticated or intimidating without strategic justification, but modern solver analysis has validated it as a critical component of a well-rounded betting strategy, particularly in position on boards that heavily favor the aggressor. Fact 174. The study of combinatorics, the mathematics of counting card combinations, is an important tool in poker. When you know your opponent's range of hands, understanding how many combinations of each hand exist helps you assess how likely they are to hold any given holding. For example, there are 6 possible combinations of any pocket pair, 6 ways to be dealt 2 kings, but 16 combinations of any 2 unpaired cards. This asymmetry means that when assessing whether an opponent holds a pair or 2 unpaired high cards, the raw number of combinations matters as much as the individual probability. Fact 175. Phil Ivey is widely considered by many professional players and analysts to be the most complete and naturally talented poker player of his generation. He has won 10 World Series of Poker bracelets, a World Poker Tour title, and has competed at the highest stakes cash games in the world. What sets Ivey apart in the eyes of his peers is not just his technical skill, but his extraordinary ability to read opponents and adapt in real time. He is sometimes called the Tiger Woods of poker, a comparison that speaks to both his dominance in competition and the awe he inspires in fellow professionals. Fact 176. Short stack tournaments, also known as turbo or hyper-turbo events, have rapidly escalating blind levels that force players into all-in situations very quickly. Because the stacks are short relative to the blinds, the game becomes heavily influenced by push or fold strategy, either going all-in or folding, with little room for complex post-flop play. Hyper-turbo events require a specialized skill set focused on pre-flop hand selection, ICM awareness, and understanding the math of all-in situations. Many online players specialize exclusively in this format because it allows a high volume of tournaments in a short time. Fact 177. The term cooler variance refers to the subset of variance attributable specifically to situations where strong hands lose to stronger hands, coolers, rather than to statistical underdogs catching lucky cards. In games where the average hand strength at showdown is high, such as Omaha, cooler variance is a more significant component of overall results than in Texas Hold'em. Understanding the sources of variance in a specific game helps calibrate how large a bankroll is necessary to withstand the natural swings of that game without going broke. Fact 178. In multi-way pots, hands involving 3 or more players, hand values shift considerably compared to heads-up situations. Hands that are strong heads-up become more vulnerable in multi-way pots because the probability that at least one opponent has a strong hand or strong draw increases with each additional player. Top pair, for example, is a powerful hand heads-up but can be very dangerous in a 5-way pot where several players are likely to have connected with the board in different ways. Multi-way pots generally reward nut hands and strong draws more than marginal made hands. Fact 179. The psychological principle of anchoring can affect poker decisions in subtle ways. Anchoring refers to the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information received when making a decision. In poker, a player who sees an opponent make a very large bet might be anchored to the interpretation that the opponent has a very strong hand, even if subsequent information suggests otherwise. Recognizing cognitive biases like anchoring, and actively working to counteract them by forcing yourself to consider alternative explanations, is part of developing a more objective and reliable decision-making process. Fact 180. The notion of exploitative versus balanced play is not a binary choice but a spectrum. A purely exploitative player adjusts maximally to every opponent's specific weaknesses, making no effort at balance. A purely balanced player never deviates from game-theoretically optimal frequencies, regardless of what the opponent does. Most skilled players operate somewhere between these extremes, maintaining a roughly balanced foundation to prevent easy exploitation while making targeted adjustments against opponents who display clear and consistent tendencies. Finding the right position on this spectrum for each specific game is an ongoing strategic judgment. Fact 181. The button is dealt last in the standard dealing rotation in most poker games. This means that in Texas Hold'em, where each player receives 2 whole cards, the button receives their second card last. While this has no mathematical significance, it means the button is the final person to receive a card before the betting begins, which in some superstitious poker cultures is associated with having the last advantage of information before play starts. Of course, in reality, the advantage of the button comes entirely from acting last in post-flop betting rounds, not from the order of the deal. Fact 182. Emotional discipline in poker extends beyond avoiding tilt. It also includes managing the euphoria of winning streaks, which can lead to overconfidence and poor game selection just as easily as a losing streak can lead to desperation. Running well can give players an inflated sense of their own skill, encourage them to take on games above their level, or cause them to abandon sound strategy in favor of reckless aggression. Maintaining emotional equilibrium, playing the same disciplined game whether winning or losing, is the hallmark of a truly seasoned player. Fact 183. Poker and chess are frequently compared as intellectual games, but they differ in one fundamental and revealing way. Chess is a game of perfect information. Both players can see the entire board at all times, and there is no element of chance in how the pieces move. Poker is a game of imperfect information. Players can never see their opponent's whole cards and must make decisions under genuine uncertainty. This distinction makes poker in some ways a more difficult intellectual challenge, because the correct decision can never be calculated with certainty and must always be made in the presence of irreducible unknowns. Fact 184. The first major poker tournament broadcast on television in the United States was the World Series of Poker on ESPN in the late 1980s. However, it was the introduction of lipstick cameras, tiny cameras embedded in the table that could show players' whole cards to television viewers, in the early 2000s that truly transformed poker into a compelling spectator sport. The ability to see the cards transformed what had previously been an opaque and mysterious game into a dramatic narrative that viewers could follow with full information, dramatically expanding the game's audience. Fact 185. The concept of range advantage describes a situation where one player's overall range of possible hands is stronger on a specific board texture than their opponent's range. When you have a range advantage, you can bet more frequently and with larger sizes because the board has favored your hand distribution. When your opponent has the range advantage, you should be more cautious and defensive, as they have more strong hands to bet for value and potentially more bluff catchers to resist your bluffs. Fact 186. Poker players who compete at the highest stakes in the world, sometimes referred to as the nosebleed stakes, play at buy-ins and blind levels that are almost incomprehensible to recreational players. Games with blinds of $500/$1,000 or higher, and buy-ins reaching $100,000 or more, are played regularly by a small community of elite players. In these games, the edge between players is often very thin, and the ability to maintain a slight advantage over thousands of hands at enormous stakes requires not just technical mastery, but exceptional mental fortitude and financial discipline. Fact 187. The art of storytelling in poker refers to the coherence and believability of your betting line across all streets of a hand. Each bet, call, check, or raise you make adds a sentence to the story of what hand you might be holding. A player who checks the flop, calls the turn, and then leads the river with a large bet is telling a story about a hand that improved gradually. If the board is consistent with that narrative, it is believable. If the board makes it implausible, opponents may read through the story and call or raise, challenging the narrative with their own. Fact 188. Online poker sites use random number generators, commonly abbreviated as RNGs, to shuffle and deal virtual cards. A properly functioning RNG produces statistically random outcomes that closely replicate the randomness of a physical shuffle and deal. Online poker operators are generally required by their licensing jurisdictions to have their RNGs tested and certified by independent auditing organizations. Despite widespread suspicion among some players that online deals are rigged, the overwhelming evidence supports the conclusion that reputable licensed sites deal fair and random cards. Fact 189. The term "run good" is poker slang for experiencing a period of favorable outcomes, hitting draws, winning coin flips, and generally having the cards fall your way. Its opposite, "run bad," describes a period of unfavorable outcomes. Both are inevitable over the course of a poker career. The challenge is developing the self-awareness to recognize when your results are being driven by run good versus genuine skill improvements, and similarly, when run bad is masking sound play rather than reflecting genuine strategic errors. Fact 190. The rake in tournaments is sometimes called the juice or the vig, terms borrowed from sports betting. Tournament rake typically ranges from 5 to 15% of the buy-in, depending on the site or casino. Lower percentage rake structures are generally found in larger, higher buy-in events, where operators can afford to charge less per dollar of buy-in due to the volume of money involved. Understanding rake structures and seeking out the most favorable ones is a practical aspect of poker economics that every serious player should incorporate into their game selection process. Fact 191. Satellite strategy differs significantly from standard tournament strategy. In a satellite where the prize is a single seat or a fixed number of seats, survival matters far more than chip accumulation. Once you have enough chips to guarantee yourself a seat, the optimal strategy is often to fold every hand and let other players eliminate each other, unless the value of additional chips is meaningful for the next tournament. This creates fascinating situations where players with enormous chip leads will fold even premium hands to avoid any risk of elimination when they are already assured of winning a seat. Fact 192. The term poker face has entered the broader English language to describe any expression of controlled neutrality used to conceal one's true thoughts or feelings. In poker, maintaining a neutral expression regardless of the strength of your hand is basic discipline, since visible emotional reactions to good or bad cards provide opponents with free information. Some players go further and deliberately cultivate a consistent demeanor, wearing sunglasses, hoodies, or headphones to minimize the signals available to observant opponents. In online poker, of course, the poker face is irrelevant. Only your betting patterns matter. Fact 193. The game of poker has inspired an extraordinarily rich body of literature, film, and popular culture. Movies like Rounders, The Cincinnati Kid, and Casino Royale have brought poker to mainstream audiences and shaped the public imagination of what the game looks and feels like. Rounders in particular, released in 1998 and set in the underground poker world of New York City, is credited by many professional players as the film that first inspired them to take the game seriously. Its portrayal of poker as a discipline requiring skill, study, and psychological resilience resonated deeply with a generation of aspiring players. Fact 194. The concept of a dead money player in a tournament refers to a participant who is not expected to make a deep run, typically a recreational player or someone significantly outmatched by the field. The presence of dead money in a tournament is good news for skilled players because it increases the overall prize pool while diluting the proportion of difficult opponents. Large recreational fields at events like the World Series of Poker main event are one reason the main event attracts so many professional players despite the relatively unfavorable structure compared to smaller, more focused events. Fact 195. Poker has a social dimension that is easy to overlook when focusing on strategy. For many players, the game is primarily a vehicle for human connection, a reason to gather, compete, share stories, and enjoy the particular camaraderie that develops among people who have sat across from each other in moments of tension and uncertainty. The best home games and casual poker environments cultivate a culture of friendly competition where the experience of playing matters as much as the outcome. Even at professional levels, many of the game's most enduring friendships and rivalries have been forged across the felt. Fact 196. The check back on the flop, where the player in position checks behind rather than continuation betting, is a frequently misunderstood play. Checking back with a medium-strength hand in position preserves the hand's showdown value, keeps the pot manageable, and allows the player to respond to information on the turn. It is also used as a deceptive play with strong hands to give the impression of weakness and encourage the opponent to lead the turn. A well-constructed range of flop checkbacks includes a mix of strong hands, medium hands, and occasionally draws, making it impossible for opponents to exploit. Fact 197. The practice of taking notes on opponents, either mentally in live play or literally using the note-taking features on online poker platforms, is one of the simplest and most underutilized tools available to developing players. A single observation about an opponent's tendencies, recorded at the right moment, can save or win significant money in future encounters. Notes might include things like 3 bets light from the button, always bets the river when they have it, or calls too wide preflop but folds to turn aggression. Over time, a collection of accurate opponent notes becomes a valuable competitive resource. Fact 198. Poker is ultimately a game of incomplete information and decision-making under uncertainty, and its deepest lessons extend well beyond the card table. The skills developed through serious poker study, probabilistic thinking, emotional regulation, strategic patience, exploitation of systematic errors, and comfort with uncertainty, are broadly applicable to many areas of life, from investing to negotiation to everyday risk assessment. Many successful people in finance, technology, and other competitive fields have noted that poker taught them to think more clearly about decisions involving risk, uncertainty, and imperfect information. Fact 199. The legacy of poker is written not just in tournament results and prize money, but in the millions of quiet evenings around kitchen tables, in the friendships formed and the lessons learned, in the patience developed and the frustration overcome. It is a game that has accompanied human beings through 2 centuries of change, adapting from frontier saloons to casino ballrooms to laptop screens, always carrying the same essential structure: a hand of cards, a pile of chips, a group of people, and the enduring question of what to do with what you have been dealt. Fact 200. Every great poker player, at some point, was a beginner who did not know the hand rankings. Every professional who earns their living from the game once sat down for the first time, made every mistake in the book, and lost money they were not sure they would recover. The distance between that beginning and genuine competence is crossed not through talent alone, but through the accumulation of hands played, hands studied, mistakes recognized, and lessons applied. Poker rewards the patient, the curious, and the persistent more than it rewards the naturally gifted. And that quiet truth is one of the most encouraging things about the game.